Chapter 7, Wedding Bells at Brocket Hall and a Happy Ending? Do not you say anything. Do not you want to marry me, Victoria? Lord Melbourne asked anxiously, the anguish reflected in his voice. It's crazy, it's impossible. You are too important and I am simply a maid. The scandal would be terrible, your reputation would suffer irreparable damage, you will be condemned to social ostracism, all your high society friends will turn your back. Replied Victoria, frightened, with much anguish and bewilderment. I do not care, Victoria. I have lived most of my life consecrated to fulfill my duty, my country, the crown, my family, with that high society that in these moments of my existence I care so little. If they kick me out of the halls of the aristocracy, of the clubs where the leaders of my party meet, even of the palaces of the crown, none of that matters to me, would be a very low price to have you by my side. At this moment all I want is to live the rest of my life with peace and happiness, and I can only do that with you, Lord Melbourne said with an almost childlike illusion. But your niece, Miss Lizzie, she has a life to come, and someday she should be a debutante in society, in high society, of course. But if you as her guardian and practically her adoptive father has been exiled from those circles of high society, they will close the doors to her because of me. Victoria answered desperately. No, it's not like that. I know to high society much better than you, Victoria, and from my own experience I know that no scandal, no matter how great, is penalized by the most rigorous social punishment for many years, at best for a few years. In that sense the memory of the aristocracy is rather fragile, Lord Melbourne said with irony and bitterness, recalling his own punishment for the scandal of his late wife. In a few years people will forget the great offence to their sense of decorum which meant the fact that Lord Melbourne married a poor girl, and they will welcome my niece with open arms, especially when they sees that she is a rich heiress, with a huge dowry for the lucky man who will marry her. And for the same reason, thinking that our children will be good prospects of husbands or wives for their own children, those same halls of aristocracy will end up opening even the new Viscountess of Melbourne, added Lord Melbourne reassuringly. Viscountess of Melbourne? Me? Please, Lord Melbourne, do not make me believe in a dream too beautiful to be real. Victoria replied with tears in her eyes. Do not you believe me? You doubt my word and my love for you. Well, I'll show you that I'm serious. Lord Melbourne said with serious, determined determination, then went to the door and opened it, poking his head into the hall. Lord Melbourne called loudly, and soon there was a servant nearby, waiting for homeowner to be offered something. Look for the bar. Mrs. Lazon, Mr. Penge, and Miss Scarrat, and tell them I want to see you right now in the library, it's a matter of urgency, Lord Melbourne said in a tone reminiscent of an authoritarian sergeant. Yes, my lord, right away. Replied the servant, somewhat intimidated by the tone and attitude of his employer. What will Lord Melbourne do? Please do not do something impetuous then you can regret. Cried Victoria, almost pleading, clinging to a sleeve of Lord Melbourne's shirt. No. I have grown tired of being prudent, giving up everything for the damn duty and my reputation. That was over with my previous life, Lord Melbourne replied coldly, as though no force in the world could stop him. I do not want you to have to sacrifice anything for me. I do not want you to be discredited in the eyes of the world because of me. I do not want titles or fortune. I only desire your love, in any way, that you can give it to me. Victoria said, more worried about him than about herself. But for me it is not enough. My way to love you is to give you everything, absolutely everything, and it will be. Lord Melbourne said with a harsh expression, of a man determined not to back down. Victoria saw him, her bewildered and even more nervous, not knowing what to do or saying, and at that moment the three persons whose presence Lord Melbourne had demanded knocked on the door, and he ordered them to enter. Mrs. Lazon, Mr. Penge, and Miss Scarrat stood next to each other, almost as if they were a troop waiting for the commander to check them out. The three of them saw Lord Melbourne and Victoria in front of them, with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness, and in the case of Miss Scarrett with concern for her friend Victoria, who remained pale and obviously nervous next to Lord Melbourne. "I have called you because I want you to serve as witnesses, as housekeeper, as butler, and as the closest friend Miss Victoria has in this house. You three are the right people to hear this and bear witness to it. A moment ago I made a proposal to Miss Victoria, a proposal that she has not really answered yet, and I thought that in order for her to have no doubt as to the seriousness of my intentions, I must readdress to her with witnesses, in front of honest and credible people who can attest to this solemn proposal." Mrs. Lazen and Mr. Penge could not help exchanging glances of confusion, while Scarrett saw Victoria with a questioning look, but Victoria seemed to be absent from reality. "A moment ago, I asked Miss Victoria Edwards to grant me the honor and the pleasure of marrying her." The reaction of the three employees was of infinite surprise. Mr. Penge's face was disbelieving, Mrs. Lazen's face froze with a rictus of scandal and astonishment, and Miss Scarrett had to cover her mouth to suppress a cry, and then the tears ran down her cheeks, touched by her friend. "I understand perfectly your reaction, but I expect from you your loyal support, as always. And I want you to make all the staff of this house understand, that from now on Miss Victoria will change her status in this house, and anyone who does not understand will have to leave." Lord Melbourne's words implied a very serious warning, and I also hope that they help Victoria in her transition to her new responsibilities. Mr. Penge his inside had a desire to ask if this was a joke of his employer, but the look and gesture of Lord Melbourne left him no doubt that this would be suicide. Mrs. Lazen had regained some of her usual aplomb, though she still looked rather bewildered, and there was a slight reproof on her face. Miss Scarrett tried to stop crying, but it was impossible, and she looked like an excited girl watching her favorite fairy tale come true before her eyes. "There's only one thing left to do now," said Lord Melbourne, turning to face Victoria, who was still standing beside him, so pale that she looked as white as the moon, now in the face of witnesses, with no possibility or desire of to retract me. "I ask you again. Victoria, would you marry me?" Victoria stared at him, wide-eyed, breathing fast, and feeling cold and trembling all over her body, while she was aware that everyone else in the room had their eyes fixed on her, especially Lord Melbourne, who almost burned her with his intense gaze. "I will do it," Victoria responded by gathering all her strength to answer loud and clear. Then, almost without giving time to react to the others, Victoria rolled her eyes and collapsed in faint. Lord Melbourne moved very fast, and moving forward, he caught her in his arms, preventing the girl's body from falling to the ground. But Victoria's head hung like she was dead, lost in her unconsciousness. "Victoria!" Lord Melbourne shouted, frightened, as he held her upright with one arm, and with the other arm's hand he brushed the hair from Victoria's face to see her face. "Victoria!" Scarrett shouted nervously as she approached her friend from behind and held her by the shoulders. "She fainted." "It's just a faint, the poor girl has had many emotions for a single day." "Please, Lord Melbourne, put her on the couch so I can do a first review," said Mrs. Lazen reassuringly, speaking as the nurse who had been in the war, in that alternative reality. Lord Melbourne lifted Victoria off the floor and carried her like a baby, and gently set her down on the couch. Then it was all a frantic activity around the unconscious girl. When Victoria recovered consciousness and opened her eyes, she realized that she was lying in a bedroom, which strangely did not look like hers, that is, her bedroom in Brocket Hall as Miss Lizzie's governess. Then she realized that she was not alone. "You wake Victoria at last!" exclaimed Eliza Scarrett, who ran to sit on the mattress beside her and kissed her forehead. "What happened?" Victoria asked, still confused. "You fainted." "That's what happened," Miss Scarrett replied with a sweet smile as she stroked Victoria's cheek. "Oh my God! But where am I?" "This is not my bedroom," Victoria said, puzzled. "In a guest bedroom, my lady," Eliza said with a funny, slightly mocking smile. "In a guest bedroom. But what do I?" Victoria began to reply, then paused. "My lady?" she asked, still disoriented. Of course. Is not that how I have to call the future Lady Melbourne? Replied Eliza, amused and moved by her friend. Suddenly Victoria came out of her disorientation and seemed to suddenly remember everything, and her face covered with a gesture of scandal and nervousness. Everything was real. Was not it a dream? Victoria exclaimed in disbelief and anguish. Of course. Lord Melbourne proposed marriage to you and you accepted, Eliza said in delight. Oh my goodness! What I am going to do? Victoria asked, like a frightened child. Well, get married, silly girl. Or do not you love Lord Melbourne? Eliza answered as a mother to her little daughter frightened by nonsense. Of course I love him. But this surpasses me! Exclaimed Victoria, panicking. He is crazy, he wants me to be the Viscountess of Melbourne. Added with a nervous, almost hysterical laugh, a poor and orphan girl of Lowood. Hear me, Viscountess. At this moment we can do two things. I can make you swallow the whole bottle of medicine that the doctor left for you, to calm your nerves, or the second option is for your loyal servant, i.e. me, to calm my lady, that is, you, to slapping. So, you're going to be a good girl and you're going to calm down? Eliza scolded her in harsh motherly tone. Victoria stopped talking and stared at Eliza with the face of a small wounded puppy. Victoria, the process is already underway, and everyone in Brocket Hall knows about marriage and tomorrow will know all of London. Honey, in a few days you'll be Lord Melbourne's wife. That man loves you, he's crazy about you. You should have seen him when you passed out, never seen him so desperate. He sent for a doctor, in a hurry, for examine to you, even though Mrs. Lazon told him you was fainting from nervous exhaustion. But he insisted and he brought you loaded to this guest bedroom. Said Eliza and saw that Victoria blushed and smiled sweetly, and then he was not at ease until the doctor assured him that you were well, and at all times spoke of you as his betrothed. Do you know what else your fiancé did? In addition to order that you to stay in this guest bedroom until marriage, he asked me more as a favor than as an order, to sleep here with you until marriage. Do you know why he did it? To protect your reputation from viperine languages, although I doubt that this measure is very effective, but the fact is that this man loves you honestly and being able to have you as his mistress or concubine, is willing to do everything to honor and protect you. Do you want to break his heart or embarrass him? Eliza added in a sympathetic tone, but placing her friend to reflect. Of course not. I love him more than my life and being his wife will be the greatest joy and pride of my life. Said Victoria, crying, but I'm afraid. Afraid of what, Victoria? Asked Eliza compassionately. That a dream so beautiful and sweet cannot last. That such happiness is impossible. I have never been happy in my life, and I do not want to drag Lord Melbourne to disgrace, Victoria replied in anguish. Listen to me, silly girl. You have been unhappy because you were born poor like most women in this country and the whole world, and because like many you had the misfortune to remain orphaned of father, and like many other girls you had the bad fortune to have a damn witch as mother that also put you a stepfather to a son of a bitch who should be in jail or hanging on the gallows, and forgive me for being so rude in saying it, but it's the truth. But in spite of adversity you fought to be someone in life, with your intelligence and courage, and you were doing very well. And now you had the great fortune that a rich but decent man fell in love with you honestly, and instead of loving you to take you sometimes to his bedroom and then kicking you and throwing you like crap, man wants to marry you. You are the girl with most luck in England. Except the Queen of course, and perhaps not even she is as lucky as you, because you have the freedom to marry whoever you want, and you have the great fortune to be able to do it with the man you love. Now I'll tell you what we're going to do. You're going to send all those damn fears to shit, and you're going to enjoy your happiness, for as long as it lasts, hopefully for many years, and you're going to leave all the problems in hands of Lord Melbourne, who is now responsible for you. From now on your duties will be those of a devoted wife, take care of your husband and the children who come, and administer your house, and, above all, be happy. We agree? Eliza said with an intense look. Okay. I will, Eliza, Victoria said gratefully, and touched. That's why we're the women, to help each other. On the other hand, this will be the last time I'll use a greengrocer's language from a London market to talk to you. And from now on, at least in public, I will call you my lady or, after you marry, Lady Melbourne, and you will call me Miss Scarrat, if you wish. We can call each other as before, but only in private. You have to prove that you are worthy to be the Viscountess of Melbourne, and you must make yourself respected for everyone, beginning with Mrs. Lazen and Mr. Penge. They are too prudent to defy Lord Melbourne, for disrespect you, but rest assured that obeying your orders will not make them very happy. You must be firm with them, polite but firm. You must make it clear that now you are the boss and that they must now obey your orders and attend your whims, and not the other way around. If they try to question your authority, you should put them on the waist at the first change. You understand? Eliza said, very serious. Yes, I understood, Victoria answered, somewhat intimidated, wondering whether she was about to marry or assume command of a battalion. Okay, and I'll be there to remind for you. On the other hand, Lord Melbourne wants to come and talk to you for a moment, said Eliza as if nothing. Now? Victoria exclaimed anxiously, her heart racing. Yes, he wanted to talk to you when you woke up, just for a moment, you know, to not be with you for a long time in a bedroom before you get married, and of course, he will insist on to keep the door open to avoid rumors. But before we call him we have to do something with this hair disaster. It's horrible, said Eliza, pulling a brush from a bedside drawer beside Victoria's bed and combed her with energetic brushes. Victoria let herself be combed by Eliza, submissively, like a little girl her mother combs. Okay, for now, then we have to study what to do with your hair before marriage. I cannot allow you to marry your hair like a scarecrow. Now we're going to do something with this face so pale, said Eliza, and began to pinch Victoria's cheeks so that they looked reddish. Well, when he gives you a good kiss that will help. Eliza. Victoria chuckled. That's the blush that I like. Now there's only one thing left, Eliza replied, and began to lower the sheet, with which Victoria covered herself to the neck. But what are you doing? Victoria asked in bewilderment. Make you show some cleavage, Eliza said half seriously and half jokingly. Eliza! Victoria exclaimed, scandalized. It's all right, Miss Prudish. Anyway, in a few days Lord Melbourne will see all there is to see. Well, I'm going to find your lover. When Eliza went to look for Lord Melbourne, Victoria took a small mirror out of the drawer of the table and quickly checked her hair, then lowered the sheet a little to show just a little cleavage. When Lord Melbourne entered, Victoria smiled sweetly, and Lord Melbourne's face brightened with a beaming smile as he approached the bed and sat on the mattress beside her. Are you okay, my love? Lord Melbourne asked with concern and tenderness as he stroked Victoria's cheek. Yes, do not worry, Lord M., Victoria replied reassuringly and affectionately. Well, at least you tell me, Lord M., but now that we're engaged to be married, would it be possible for you to call me William? Lord Melbourne asked jokingly, causing them both to laugh. You know me, I have trouble getting used to the changes. But soon I'll get used to it. William, Victoria answered cheerfully. Lord Melbourne came and kissed her on the mouth, a tender, deep kiss. When he broke the kiss, Lord Melbourne stared at her until she opened her eyes and then their gazes met. I love you. Lord Melbourne told her. And I love you, William. Victoria exclaimed excitedly. My angel. Tomorrow we have to talk about our marriage, so rest and try to sleep well, said Lord Melbourne. Try to do it yourself too, Lord William. Please, sleep in your bed today, not in a library chair, Victoria replied affectionately and protectively. All right, I promise you. Sleep, dear, Lord Melbourne answered, giving her another sweet kiss on the lips, sweet and slow. When Lord Melbourne retired, Eliza entered the bedroom and went to bed with Victoria. The two girls talked for a long time, and at one point Eliza began to hug Victoria by the waist. "Think that in a few days Lord Melbourne will grasp you down like this, he'll have you in his bed," Eliza said mockingly. "Eliza, you tickle me." Victoria laughed. "My sweet Victoria, my beautiful Victoria, I want to make love to you until dawn," said Eliza, imitating Lord Melbourne's voice. "Enough, Eliza!" "Ha ha!" cried Victoria, unable to control her laughter. After they both laughed for a while, Victoria sighed. "Eliza, is it very beautiful? That is, making love to a man, is it as beautiful as they tell in the novels?" Victoria asked, sounding dreamy and excited. "I do not know what novels you've read, Victoria, but no matter how beautiful or erotic them may be, it cannot eloquently describe the beauty of the act. When you're very in love with a man, when you love him with all your strength and he corresponds to you, there is nothing more intense, exciting and beautiful in the world. It is the most sublime experience you can experience in this life," answered Eliza with sincere emotion. "I imagine, and it seems to me that in a few days I'm going to have that kind of intimacy with Lord Melbourne," Victoria said, her voice almost broken by emotion. "I'm very happy for both of you, especially for you, but young lady, do not go to cause him a heart attack, consider his age," Eliza said mockingly. "Hey stupid, do not mess with my fiancé!" cried Victoria, mockingly and with feigned indignation, and struck Eliza with the pillow. "These are not acceptable manners, Viscountess!" cried Eliza, and returned the blow with her pillow to Victoria, and both began a battle of pillows with laughter. In the days that followed, the events passed at a rapid pace. Lord Melbourne communicated the news to his brother George, the only surviving male brother in that alternative reality, and his sister Emily, who, of course, they reacted in horror, but Lord Melbourne's firm determination, the vehemence with which he faced his brothers, intimidated them and convinced them that there was no human power to change their decision, so they reluctantly agreed. From Lord Melbourne's close friends only Lady Emma Portman respected his decision, although inevitably she also reacted scandalised at first and with some suspicions that Victoria was a fortune hunter, but after conversing with the girl decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the rest of London's high society reacted scandalised and censured Lord Melbourne's decision, and even his colleagues in the Whig party turned their back on him, and everyone dismissed his political career. Only the Duke of Wellington felt a certain sympathy for Lord Melbourne, though he merely expressed it with sarcastic and mocking remarks. But none of that mattered to Lord Melbourne, who was just happy and eager to marry Victoria. Mrs. Jacobs, the owner of the shop where Lord Melbourne bought all of Victoria's clothing, was commissioned to make Victoria's wedding dress, and along with her staff moved to Brocket Hall to work with the bride in privacy of the mansion. Eliza worked to prepare a beautiful and elegant hairstyle for Victoria, and a distinguished makeup, so that the day of the wedding she was radiant. On the day of the marriage a kindly Anglican clergyman, an old acquaintance of Lord Melbourne, came to Brocket Hall to officiate the wedding in the main hall of the mansion, conditioned for the occasion. Mr. Francatelli was in charge of taking Victoria to the improvised altar, on the initiative of Eliza Scarratt, gratefully accepted by Victoria. The bride was spectacular, irresistibly beautiful and elegant, and Lord Melbourne was very elegant in a dark suit. The ceremony was brief but emotional, and wedding grooms gave the affirmative answer to the crucial question in a firm and clear voice, but with the emotion reflected in the eyes and the gesture of the face. Victoria could not help crying when the clergyman declared them formally united in holy marriage, and Lord Melbourne gave her a soft, quick kiss on the lips, while Eliza Scarratt also wept on the arm of Mr. Francatelli, and even Mrs. Lazen did not stop feeling a little excited. Lord Melbourne's niece, Lizzie, was very happy because she now had a young and beautiful aunt whom she adored. Apart from the brothers of Lord Melbourne and Emma Portman, there were no other representatives of the aristocracy, and the majority of the guests were the employees of Brocket Hall and some female friends of Victoria of Lowood. At a moment when Lord Melbourne and Victoria were conversing with tender complicity and happiness, Connor approached them to Lord Melbourne's surprise. "Let me congratulate you, Lady Melbourne," Connor said kindly and sincerely. "My dear, I'll introduce you to Connor," Lord Melbourne said to Victoria, and paused as he remembered that his strange angel benefactor had no surname, or at least he had not mentioned any. "Connor Wakefield, to serve you, Lady Melbourne," Connor said, bending over to kiss the back of Victoria's hand in a gallant salute. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am." "It's a pleasure for me too, Mr. Wakefield," said Victoria smiling, very kindly. "Are you an old friend of my husband?" "Well, we're friends, but not for a long time, but for me it's like I've known him all his life," Connor said with a funny smile, and seeing Lord Melbourne with a look of complicity that he corresponded. "But I had a great desire to meet you, for a few months ago William had spoken of nothing but you. In fact, I believe that I have been his confidant in the love so great that he feels for you, and I am glad that love has a happy ending. I'm glad to hear that William tell you about his feelings for me." "She's going to have to come to Brocket Hall for dinner to tell me what my husband told you about me," said Victoria charmingly. "I would love, Lady Melbourne, but my business takes me to travel the world, and I think my current business in London is nearing completion," said Connor, giving a significant glance at Lord Melbourne. "My next business will take me to Scotland, and I may have to settle myself there for a few months, but if I do have the time I will be happy to come and have dinner with you at least once before travelling." "It will be our pleasure," said Lord Melbourne. After exchanging a few more phrases, Connor excused himself and retired. The small party gave way to a banquet, and then the few people who did not reside in the house left, and the house was silent while Eliza prepared Victoria for her wedding night in the marriage room that had been occupied alone by Lord Melbourne long before that his first wife died. "I told you the bed was big," Eliza said to Victoria in a relaxed tone. "Yes, it's very big," Victoria replied, unable to hide her nerves. "Victoria, do not be nervous. You will see that it is very pleasant. Just relax and let the modesty aside, and let Lord Melbourne guide you, let him show you what you have to do. I'm sure he'll be very considerate of you," Eliza said reassuringly as she took her hands in hers. "I will. Thanks, Eliza," Victoria answered gratefully and touched. After Eliza left the bedroom, Victoria stood by the bed without knowing what to do. She was barefoot and was wearing only a long nightgown up to her ankles. Underneath her nightgown she had no other garment, and when she saw herself in a large mirror in a corner, Victoria realized that the nightgown was more transparent than she thought, and her nipples and pubic hair from her most intimate part were more or less visible. "Damn Mrs. Jacobs!" Victoria thought, remembering the dressmaker who had sold her new wardrobe. At that moment she heard the door open, and without turning around she knew it was Lord Melbourne, and her heart quickened. He approached her from behind, very slowly, and suddenly Victoria felt the warm breath of Lord Melbourne on the back of her neck. She shuddered as he put his big, strong hands on her shoulders. "You're trembling, Victoria," Lord Melbourne said in a sweet, reassuring voice, "and you're cold, too. Do not be afraid, please." "I'm not afraid, Lord William. If someone I should not be afraid of is you. It's my first time, and I cannot help being nervous." "I do not want to disappoint you," Victoria said, her voice cracked with emotion. "You can never disappoint me. Please let me show it, let me show you my love," Lord Melbourne answered in a suggestive voice. Victoria nodded, and then Lord Melbourne wrapped his arm around her waist. As he stood behind Victoria, he made her turn her head to kiss her lips. The kiss became more passionate, and then Victoria turned and Lord Melbourne embraced her without ceasing to kiss her. He was dressed in a nightshirt and long underpants, and in the middle of the embrace Victoria felt a hard bulge in Lord Melbourne's crotch. Still hugging and kissing, they both walked a few paces and fell on the bed. Lord Melbourne took Victoria's small body and placed it better on the bed, then settled on top of her, and continued to kiss her in the mouth, almost in a frenzy. Then he tossed Victoria's nightgown from one of the girl's shoulders and let him down, until he uncovered one of Victoria's breasts. Then Lord Melbourne began to suck on the breast, to suck with delight and frenzy the nipple of the chest, while with one hand tightened it. Victoria closed her eyes and raised her head, and the look on her face reflected a mixture of shame, nervousness, and pleasure. After, Lord Melbourne slid his hands over Victoria's body. She had one leg bent, her knee raised and her foot resting on the mattress, and Lord Melbourne's hand slid over that leg, pushing the fabric of her nightgown down, until he bare her leg to her hip. His anxious hand stroked her bare thigh, then rose to her knee. Lord Melbourne kissed her leg from thigh to foot, and then eagerly pulled Victoria's nightgown up to her waist, leaving Victoria's vagina naked. She trembled hard, kept her eyes closed and with one hand clutched the sheets. Lord Melbourne began stroking bushy bush of Victoria's pubic hair with the back of one hand, seeing the sex still unexplored of his lover with lustful desire. "It's the most beautiful and exquisite thing in the world," Lord Melbourne said in a manly voice, full morbid. Slowly he brought his face to Victoria's genitals, and kissed the hair that covered them. Delighting in the scent of his wife's sex, kissing her vagina again and again through the tangle of hairs, and timidly poking his tongue into the most hidden intimacy of the young woman. Then Lord Melbourne paused, to take off his nightshirt and strip off his underpants, while Victoria stared at him with narrowed eyes, and felt a strange emotion for her when she saw the dick of him erect. Lord Melbourne kissed Victoria's belly, stroked her breasts, kissed her lips. Then he gently opened her legs wider, placed himself in a position above the young woman, and slowly penetrated her. "Ah!" Victoria exclaimed with a pained expression on her face, and with her two small hands clung to Lord Melbourne's broad back, nailing her nails in a spontaneous gesture, and buried her face in his cheek. "I do not want to hurt you, my love. I just want to love you," whispered Lord Melbourne. "Do not let me go. Do not let go of me, William." "I love you," Victoria said, almost in ecstasy, her voice cracking with excitement and nerves. Lord Melbourne loved her with passion, almost with rage. He rammed into her, with his hard dick wounding the intimate cavity of Victoria, until then virgin. He sank his erect cock into her, as if he wanted to break her with him, while he kissed her in a frenzy. As if all the pain and frustration of so many years had become wild and irrepressible lust. Victoria's moans, her cries of pain and pleasure that were almost screams, excited Lord Melbourne much more. When he felt that he could not take much longer, Lord Melbourne sought Victoria's lips and kissed her passionately, just as he reached the climax and poured his seed into her, and a moment later Victoria uttered a loud moan, feel that she too reached the climax. They both looked up and laughed, with a giggle that expressed pleasure and almost childlike joy, and then they kissed each other on the lips as Victoria stroked his cheek. A few moments later they were both hugging each other, and Victoria kissed husband's bare chest. "Did you like Victoria?" asked Lord Melbourne, satisfied and genuinely interested. "At Lowood they taught us that it was a sin for a woman to talk about sex, even with her husband, and that it was even more sinful for a woman to enjoy sex, even within marriage. Evidently my Lowood tutors or were maidens, or they did not have a husband like mine," Victoria replied with a smile. "So what?" said Lord Melbourne jokingly. "I loved William, I loved it. I'm a little sore if you want to know, but I loved it," Victoria replied blushing. "That is because your virtue is no longer intact," Lord Melbourne replied mischievously. "No, I gave it to the man I love," said Victoria, touched and happy, as she came to kiss him. "But the night just begins, Mrs. Melbourne, and this man wants much more," said Lord Melbourne maliciously as he pounced on her, with his erect dick. "Oh my God! Oh, William!" exclaimed Victoria, losing herself in the lust in her husband's arms. The following days were of immense happiness, for the day Victory and Lord Melbourne spent most of the time together, talking, doing different activities together, sharing with little Lizzie. And every night they made love until they were exhausted, and they donned naked embraces, and on several occasions also made love in the morning before cleaning and dressing for breakfast. Only a small shadow clouded their happiness for a moment. One morning when before breakfast Victoria became serious to talk about something that troubled Lord Melbourne. She told him that she knew of his visit to the brothel, and Lord Melbourne, surprised, explained that he had only gone to meet a friend who insisted on seeing him there, but he swore that he had done nothing with anyone, and that many years ago who did not step on a brothel. I understand, and like I told you, you do not have to apologize, because that happened before our marriage. And of course I believe you, William. But from now on, I do not want you to go back to one of those horrible places, and if you ever need another female company, I'd rather not find out. Victoria tried to look serene and dignified but unable to hide her nervousness and anger, with a very serious face, and in the background with some fear of annoying Lord Melbourne. You look so beautiful when you're jealous! Exclaimed Lord Melbourne, flattered and happy. I'm not jealous, sir, I just... Victoria protested, somewhat offended, but Lord Melbourne stepped forward and took her face in his hands. The only woman I want to make love to every day of the rest of my life is you. I swear by my son, by Lizzie, and by the children I hope to have with you that I will never sleep with another woman other than you. Your body is the only one I want, Lord Melbourne replied cheerfully and then kissed her in lips, a deep and passionate kiss. In that case, we will not have any problems, because I am delighted to give you my body every day for the rest of my life, Victoria said, blushing happily as she put her little hands in her husband's tie. Lord Melbourne kissed her again. It was not long before Victoria got pregnant. She started to feel sick and Eliza suggested that she might be pregnant, and she had the doctor come to her without knowledge of Lord Melbourne, and when she was sure she gave surprise to him, at a time when found him alone in his library. Lord Melbourne. I inform you that his wife, Lady Victoria of Melbourne, is going to fulfill one of his principal obligations, said Victoria, amused and joking. Really? And what will it be, Lady Melbourne? Asked Lord Melbourne jokingly and intriguedly, as he sat at his desk, watching his wife, standing beside him. I'm going to give an heir to the title of Viscount of Melbourne. I'm pregnant! Victoria exclaimed with bright eyes. Lord Melbourne jumped to his feet and hugged Victoria with laughter and tears of both. The months passed quickly, while Victoria endured her pregnancy with the best will, despite her significant discomfort, encouraged by the care and affection of her husband. Meanwhile, she did not forget her family, and through Eliza sent money to her mother and clothes for her brothers. Eliza, accompanied by Frank Catelli, for her safety, met with Victoria's mother in a tavern, and gave her the money and things Victoria sent her. My lady is very generous, Eliza told her at first, hiding with great effort the contempt she felt for her friend's mother. Victoria's mother was rather unsympathetic and was always on the defensive, and embittered. She often showed signs of blows to her face, no doubt made by her husband. However, on one occasion when Eliza left, Victoria's mother asked if her daughter was happy, and Eliza felt that her interest was genuine. She's very happy, ma'am. She is the happiest woman in the world, because she and her husband are very much in love, and he protects her and has given her all the love she had never known. And they both look forward with hope to the child on the way, Eliza said firmly. Victoria is very fat? Asked innocently a half-sister of Victoria, a little girl of about 5 years who accompanied Victoria's mother. Yes, sweetheart, she's very fat and complains about that, Eliza said tenderly. And can I see the baby? Asked the anxious little girl. Of course, sweetness. Your sister wants her brothers to know her child, Eliza said, as she saw in a corner of her eye how a tear ran down the cheek of Victoria's mother. One day they were Victoria, Lord Melbourne, and Lizzie in a hall of Brocket Hall. Victoria was lying on a couch as she used to do those days, because with her huge belly, she wanted nothing else. Lizzie was sitting next to her and tenderly stroked Victoria's belly. Is there a long time, Aunt? Lizzie asked. Less than 2 months, Lizzie, and you can meet the baby, Victoria replied sweetly. But Victoria saw that the little girl was making a rather sad gesture. "Are not you glad to have a little cousin?" Victoria asked affectionately. "It's just that when you have your own children you will not love me so much, Auntie," said the little girl, pouting. "It's not true, Lizzie. I am also your mother, if you want. And if you want to call me Mom, I would be happy," Victoria said, hugging her. "Seriously?" exclaimed the little girl. "Of course. I love you, Lizzie," Victoria said and kissed Lizzie on the cheek. Lord Melbourne stared at the scene, tender, and forgot to read the newspaper in his hand. But after a few moments he suddenly felt a severe headache, and then he felt a tingling in the right side of his body. When he tried to raise his right arm he noticed that he lacked strength. Frightened, he recognized the symptoms. "Victoria! Victoria! Ask for help," Lord Melbourne said in a weak, broken voice. "What's the matter, William? William!" Victoria exclaimed, frightened to see her husband's pale face and the other signs that something very serious was happening. "Lizzie, run and ask for help. Find someone, fast!" Victoria added, frightened, and the little girl ran away. Lord Melbourne felt that the vision of an eye was failing him, and he knew what would come. "Victoria, I love you," said Lord Melbourne, and then collapsed, falling from his chair to the floor. "William! William!" Victoria shouted desperately, trying hard to rise from the sofa, but only managed to slip from the sofa to the floor, and tried to crawl to Lord Melbourne, crying and screaming. Eliza rushed into the living room, and behind her came Mrs. Lazen, who was holding Lizzie's hand. The little girl cried in terror. "My lady!" cried Eliza in alarm and ran to help Victoria. Mrs. Lazen let go of Lizzie's hand and ran to help Victoria, and with the help of Eliza, they lifted her to her feet. Then Mrs. Lazen ran to Lord Melbourne and knelt beside him to help him. "Penge!" cried Mrs. Lazen, "Penge!" Penge rushed into the living room and saw the scene, startled. "Get the doctor! It's very urgent!" exclaimed Mrs. Lazen, "and bring help to take Lord Melbourne to his bedroom." Penge ran off and screamed to summon the employees. "William! William!" Victoria shouted almost hysterically, while Eliza held her so she would not try to kneel next to Lord Melbourne. "Miss Scarrat, please try to take my lady to another room, it is not convenient that in her state witness this. And take Lizzie, she should not see either," said Mrs. Lazen with sincere concern and with damp eyes, holding back tears. "I will not leave him. Do not leave me, my love, do not leave me!" shouted Victoria. Penge burst in with several employees, including Francatelli, who shuddered when he saw Eliza's pale, tear-stained face. The employees, with Penge at the head and following the instructions of Mrs. Lazen, carefully lifted Lord Melbourne and took him away. Eliza instructed a maid to take Lizzie away, and in the meantime she accompanied Victoria to the group that took Lord Melbourne. Victoria was crying desperately, and Eliza wrapped her arm around her waist and was watching her, fearing she would faint. Trapped in his body, Lord Melbourne again suffered a stroke, the previous time in another reality. But this time the situation was worse, and some time later Lord Melbourne felt that he was levitating, although in fact it was his soul that seemed to leave his body. And then he saw the face of his doctor, who desperately fought in his body, and beyond that he saw Victoria that at the door of the master bedroom cried, screams, and struggled to enter the bedroom, while Eliza and Mrs. Lazen tried to calm her, they very worried for her. Full of fear and pain, Lord Melbourne felt as if he was entering a tunnel of shadows, deep darkness, which he already knew and now feared. I wanted to scream, I wanted to call Victoria, but he could not. Suddenly a spot of light rose and grew into a portal, and from it emerged Connor. "And here we are, again at the starting point, or in your case, the end," said Connor with a very serious tone and gesture.